We will go to 5.5. Approve continuation of proclamation declaring a Clear Lake Hitch emergency, pulled by Supervisor Sabatier.
Thank you very much. So there's been a lot of good conversation. I listened into the meeting over at the Water Board. The approximate number that was said was 1.4 million, which is great, but I don't know what that means. And 1 year is not a year to be able to measure. And I'm just wondering if we can ask staff to work with Fish and Wildlife and the Water Board to figure out what is the number we're aiming for. Because I am getting some feedback from those saying 1.4 million, it's over. Well, I don't know what the number should be. I don't know how 1 year can really tell us how this has changed. I suspect that after 2 or 3 years of seeing similar numbers, then we can say that's the number we have. But I'm just kind of curious. There's no metric in our emergency. Wondering if we can ask staff to work with the professionals who understand the Hitch population and the Hitch issue to come back to us with a approximate, maybe even a tiered approach, where right now we're in the extreme situation of the Hitch population and then the severe situation with the Hitch, and then just kind of seeing. I'd like to feel that like there's progress, but I don't have a meter to tell me what it is that we're aiming for, and I would like to be able to have something appropriate to put on there. I am not the one to ask for what that number is, but wondering how the rest of the board feels about looking at setting up some sort of metric within the emergency declaration.
Supervisor Crandall, I think you had your pen up first.
Yeah, I feel like there does need to be a metric. However, there's not really a way to determine that, I think, from our standpoint in the county. And the reason I say that is because even if we have the water for 1 year, let's say that we have another drought, whatever the case may be, the main issue is they're not thriving in the streams. The work hasn't been done to ensure that they're safe, so there's not really a habitat or anything of the like to ensure their safety. So we can count and then say, oh, it's not an emergency anymore, but it's inevitable that it's going to be again until we fix those things. So for me, I mean, we could ask them to do it, but I don't think you're going to get, I think you're going to get a number, but then there's going to be a different number because the weather and and the earth, basically, Mother Earth climate change is going to determine that. And if we can get these actual streams, some of these projects done that are in the Blue Ribbon Committee, I think those will give the opportunity for them to thrive or have a better, more consistent passage and spawning behaviors and things of the like. So I don't know. I mean, I'm just giving you asked for our insight, so I'm giving you my insight.
Supervisor Green?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the desire to chart a path forward based on one or more metrics. I don't think we're anywhere close to having a usable metric or set of metrics. And I think one reason for that, if you were to use population estimates as that metric, one thing we've noticed in the last year is the absolute dearth of reliable data as far as what population counts may be based on some mix of the gill netting that USGS does and more anecdotal reports of fish populations that were observed around the county. And to the point of recovery, that's a multi-year understanding that has to evolve. So a population data set from 1 year or another strong year, if we have one this year, really doesn't get us to the answers that the state regulators need to craft their understanding. Are we still in a state of emergency? Are we in some set of endemic decline? And as was noted at the last Water Board's meeting, in addition to whatever we're noting about the general decline of the Hitch population, we're also seeing general declines in other fish species within Clear Lake. And so I'm not aware of any reliable metric at this point that would negate the need for our emergency proclamation. I'm starting to think about when we start looking at population figures and other environmental factors, whether in fact our emergency is limited to the Clear Lake Hitch. So in the State Water Board regulations that are coming out, the huge amount of data gaps that they're facing in their own understanding points to Their one metric that they are charged with finding is what's a minimum in-stream flow sufficient to support the hitch during their spawning cycles. We have no clue how to estimate those right now because we don't have a good enough groundwater data to estimate the interplay between groundwater pumping and surface stream flows. So it is an immensely complicated subject. Again, I do appreciate the idea that we should somehow come to some common understanding that would allow us to throttle our own emergency footing. But everything I've seen in the past year since we passed our emergency proclamation indicates that we don't know what we don't know. We're just floundering about in the dark. And so the Water Board's attempts to fill in the data gaps as far as groundwater usage is important. Continued attention to population modeling is important, but I'm aware that this may be the first year that we've actually tagged some hitch to see how they're floating around the lake. And there's clear room for improvement and population modeling for our non-native fish species as well. So there's a lot to unpack in there. So anyway, to your question though, I'm not eager to apply any type of metric now because I think the only metric I have right now is a wider understanding of how many data gaps there are and how hard it's going to be to fill those data gaps.
Vice Chair Simon?
Yeah, you know, at the presentations that were given by all agencies at the Hitch Summit that we just attended last month, that's exactly as Michael Green stated. You know, there are a lot of data gaps. I like the way he said it. No, we don't know what we don't know. So they are building on that. Obviously, they made some definite real commitments to start to work on that data, figure out what is going on with the hitch population here in the lakes. Obviously, we had good rain years, so that changed some of the outlooks that you're seeing in the creeks and streams. But yeah, we're not there yet, but it's being worked on. That data conversation, as you always bring up with all things that we're talking about, is being worked on with all agencies, including the tribes and all the organizations working on it. And I think we'll have a better matrix or idea in which direction we're moving by next year's summit. So I think that's a little early at this point.
And just to at least clarify, not looking for something to come back within the next month, just a broad request. If that comes only when the data is available, and that happens to be a year from now, 2 years from now, I don't know. There's just nothing in the when people hear 1.4, I'm getting phone calls of what does that mean? Is it over? And the answer is this is a 1 year's worth of data. There's no way to know that where we are in is this data we missed last year? Is this new data? It has to be over the course of 3 to 5 years or whatever the case might be that you can see some stability rather than having one number that looks large and having questions. And so if we can get to the point of creating some sort of metric, which again needs to be done by those who are experts in those fields, not me, that it would help to at least identify for those who read our proclamation to better understand what we're aiming for and maybe what some of the stepping stones are, what the steps are on getting to the conclusion that we're looking for. So just wanted to have the conversation. I think that from what I understand, we all agree that at one point it would be nice to have that information to be able to say this is what we're aiming for. We're obviously doing a lot of work, and maybe the question was premature and need to be a little patient in order to get to that point.
Supervisor Crandall?
Yes, there was a couple of slides that I think I'll highlight. I think it was GS, something GS?
USGS.
Yes, GS. They gave two slides that were very important and kind of, actually it doesn't kind of, it actually alludes to what you're talking about, is that one, there was a count or something of the like that showed in 2017, 2018 what the count was and how high it was, and then after the decline, and then the same actual amount in 2020, this year, 2022. And so they're like, where do these hitch come from if they're not surviving or they're not thriving? So the only thing they can give is a theoretical type of example that maybe it came from Tule Lake, maybe it came from this. We're thinking it's that in Blue Lakes. And so with that being said, the habitat of Middle Creek is important for that. But I think one of the things that's, is a little frustrating is how can we just basically ask, is it over now, so we can just kind of, get away from this? I mean, with other species and whatnot, you have to go through, quite a few years to ensure that it's thriving or it's not thriving. And again, it gets me right back to the streams. It gets me right back to, that work that needs to be done. It was emphasized in that Hitch Summit to the state, like, look, we need these things done in order for us to ensure that they survive, especially when one of the actual presentations showed that they thought maybe it was Tule Lake, which would connect to Middle Creek Restoration, which would provide a habitat. So I think a lot of that needs to happen, and we could do the studies here. I mean, yeah, that's fine, but the way I feel is whoever does the studies in county, it's hard for whoever to accept it. But when we have the state or USGS or anyone else do it, it's a little more palatable for whoever has their mindset or thought. So it's unfortunate it's that way, but that's at least what I've gathered and seen, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
And just the last comment, the USGS even stated that the only data that they started collecting, I think, was in 2017, but 2017 is not a baseline because that's already after a decline has occurred over decades. And so I don't see us necessarily asking. I think we're waiting for folks like USGS. What is the baseline that we are aiming for? Because obviously 2017 was way late in looking at what the population is, especially since it was put on the threatened species list in 2014, which means the decline was way before that. And just out of curiosity to better understand, and so that folks, when they see a number, let's say next year for what happened in the spawning season, they can make a comparable saying, yes, we are at 2.2 million maybe this year, but we're aiming for this. We're not aiming for 2.2 million. So we'll get there when we get there. But just, again, wanted to be curious about if we can make that request. So.
Okay, do we have anyone from the public? No hands up in Zoom and no one in the chambers. We can bring it back to the board for action. So I'm just wondering how there can be a report back to the board from what you learned at the summit, what was shared at the summit, because we do have this emergency, and it would be a perfect opportunity for the rest of the board to be informed about what steps have happened since last year. We did have a report about the creek cleanups, so I'm just wanted to get your thoughts on that, Supervisor Crandall.
Well, I think this summit happened, 2 weeks ago? And the next meeting wasn't really ideal to have it, because we had 3 people here. And so, and that would have been something reported out in our calendars. And so, as you know, last week with the situation, we weren't able to do that either. So, I mean, if you do want to have that, I mean, it's not a problem. We could probably invite Luis Santana, who would be able to better, explain as well. We can give our point of view as, what we talked about, and some of the commitments that were made by the state and other governments. But what I do know is it was a lot more smoother than any other meeting we've had when it comes to the Hitch. So that's a good thing, So, yeah. So I mean, I think too, that talking with Luis, who is set the whole thing up on that end, would help outside of previous to having this report. That would be a good thing. So, I mean, if you want to schedule it, we could schedule it and just give a report out.
Alternatively, I know we had staff there, and I think just for a short catch-up bullet point item. I think, not to task them, they have so much on their plate right now, but they would be able to report out. And I'm only doing that in defense of Luis, who is a blue ribbon, and he was very present, but meetings are not his favorite thing. So I don't want to necessarily put him on
He's
this.
come and reported to us before about it, so it shouldn't be an issue. And I know that Supervisor Sabatier, you mentioned a baseline of 2017. I mean, Ron Montez, the elder, mentioned a baseline, which was, a flourishing amount of hitch in the past. And then when they started, there was a specific amount. It probably wasn't as many as before. And so I don't know how we determine that baseline. USGS seemed to not even have really an answer to that either. It was just a theory. We think it came from Blue Lakes, and maybe too, you see what I'm saying? So there's really not a way to establish that unless, they have some other, whoever else has some sort of data or whatever the case may be. And it wouldn't really be fair to start a spot, and then that way we can determine that it's not an emergency anymore when we have a specific amount now, when, in the past, we would have to find some historical data or something that shows an amount. The only thing we have is oral, or someone else's own study or count. But then again, are they actual fish biologists or whatever the case may be? So it's complex,
Okay. All right, ready for action?
If there's nothing further, Madam Chair, I move to approve the continuation of the proclamation declaring a Clear Lake Hitch emergency.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes.